So I'd like to welcome everybody to the annual meeting of Wisconsin's Green Fire. My name is Tom Giroux and I'm the president. And I'd like to start off our meeting today talking about our land acknowledgement statement. I'm not going to read it to you. It's on our website. I encourage you to visit it and learn more about the native tribes of Wisconsin, the native peoples that were here before us Europeans came around. I do think it is important that we recognize that we share Wisconsin's resources with those indigenous people, and we want to be respectful stewards of those natural resources. And we need to continue to strive and understand and include diverse identities, knowledge, and crucial perspectives in our work in Wisconsin conservation policy and practice. I think it's really important. Like I said, I'm not going to read the rest of the statement. I will say that, give you a couple examples where I think we've tried to respect the indigenous knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge that they have. When it comes to our wolf management team, we work closely with tribes. We thought it was important that we support their efforts to have buffers around their reservations where wolf harvest would be limited. And I think that's an example. Another example is the Line 5 pipeline. We worked with the Bad River tribe there. It's critically important to their wild rice waters and the Kakagan sloughs. And so we've worked hand in hand and tried to respect their perspective in that issue. And then lastly, I was moved by Douglas Cox, who is joining Robin Schmidt on the Natural Resources Board, and he's from the Menominee Nation. And when he was asked at his hearing whether he would favor a crane hunt, he talked about the fact that the crane, like Mainga the wolf, is a clan within their tribe, and that it's spiritually very, very important to them. And he said it would be a tough decision for him to approve a crane hunt. And obviously, I'm paraphrasing. You want to go to Wisconsin Eye, it was really fascinating discussion. So back to our agenda here. We're going to start off with me going over the agenda here and with the welcome. I just wanted to tick off our mission statement, in addition to what I've talked about so far. Wisconsin's Green Fire's mission is to advance science-informed analysis and policy solutions that address Wisconsin's greatest conservation challenges. So that's just a quick review and welcome. On the next bullet, we'll be hearing from our new executive director, Melissa Johnson. After that, we're hopeful that David Ortiz will show up. We don't see him online yet. If he doesn't, we've got plan B. Don't worry about it. We're going to talk a bit about wake boats and their impacts on lake ecosystems. We have a short business meeting reviewing the minutes. We'll have a treasurer's report from Bob Gerda, our treasurer. And then we'd like to have action on our restated articles of incorporation and our restated bylaws, which were mailed to you 30 days in advance of this meeting. The business meeting will be adjourned, and then I hope you all will stay. We have a special thing for the end of the meeting, and we'd love for you to stay through. If you can't for some reason, you'll be able to see it on YouTube afterwards, so I'd encourage you to come back and take a look at it. We will be using, to the extent we can, just because there's so many people online, the chat functions for the Q&A sessions of the agenda. If you're having trouble navigating the chat function, of course, you can unmute and ask a question too. So that's it for my welcome and agenda review, and we'll hope to stay on target to be done in about 90 minutes or so. So I don't have a long introduction for Melissa Johnson. I know you're all active members, so you read her bio and her information in our newsletters, but I want to turn it over to Melissa to talk about what she's learned about the organization in her few short months with us. So take it away, Melissa.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I see so many people I know, like Joe. Hi, it's been a while since I've seen you, Joe Ansel. It's
Yeah.
always nice seeing you. So many other people that I know, and those I don't know, I look forward to getting to know you better. Um, what a privilege, what an honor. I am thrilled to be here, not only as a Green Fire member and a Science Council member and a volunteer, but now as your executive director. So a year ago, I was getting ready to retire from Marathon County as the director of the Marathon County Solid Waste Department after 15 years of managing garbage for a big chunk of north part of Wisconsin. Never in my wildest dreams, ever, did I think I'd be sitting here now talking with you as your executive director. When I go out and I chat with folks about what my new job is, the first thing that comes up is, well, what do you do? And I reply, well, every day is like a master's degree in something new. I started on November 1st, and one of the first things I started learning about was the indigenous people and the way they're trying to protect the wild rice. Soon after that, I had to learn about beavers. I have learned about, of course, the Wolf Plan, was an amazing read, and the work in that was, again, every day is a master's degree in something else. The public doctrine, and why it's so important to protect our lake beds, because we all deserve access to those. It's been every single day is something new. It's totally exciting, and it's kind of like my head's on a swivel. So if you're familiar with The Exorcist and Linda Blair in that, when her head was spinning around, that's the way I feel most days. But I also tell people that my job is actually to work with the smartest people in Wisconsin. Every single day I get to work with, honestly, and this is a true statement, I get to work with some of the smartest people I have ever met in my entire life. Not only are they smart, but they are passionate about the job and the work that we do to make Wisconsin better. Not so much for us. I mean, as I'm looking around, some of you are probably around my age. The work we do isn't, it's about our children and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren and our great great grandchildren, so that they can enjoy clean water, clean air, and the resources that we've taken for granted that are becoming more and more diminished and more damaged. So the work we do, the amazing smart people and the hard work is all about the future. And I've got to find this $5 bill. I have a $5 bill up here and I can't find it now. But to give you an idea on how passionate I am about building that future, I was working on the fall appeal and getting the letters out. My grandson was watching me. He's 8 years old, just turned 8. And he said, Grandma, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm sending out letters to see if people will give us, help us by giving us money so we can do our work. And he goes, why, are you poor? And I said, no, we just need money to be able to do the work, because these things are expensive. And pretty soon he lives with me, ran upstairs, and I'm still sitting in the living room signing appeal letters. And he comes back down and he has $5 in his hand. And it's his Tooth Fairy money. Yes, Tooth Fairy does give $5 now, inflation. He said, Grandma, can you use this? And I said, yes. And he handed it to me, and I said, your $5, Colton, will help us make sure you have clean air to breathe and clean water to swim in. And he got a big smile on his face. And I still have that $5 here. He doesn't know that I'm going to save it. And when he graduates from high school, he'll get something wonderful. So I do have a short presentation, and I can't share until you're done, Tom. All righty. So a little bit about what I've learned so far, and I want to be able to share with all of you. Again, there's my email address and my phone number. Please, please, please feel free to contact me. This is how I learned the organization. This is how I learned the members. This is how I learned the supporters, the donors, the sponsors. I love meeting people, and please don't hesitate. My door is always open, and I want to hear from you. I found this quote for today, and I thought it was important for a couple of reasons. I am a Morris K. Udall Congressional Scholar for Excellence in National Environmental Policy. I was awarded that distinction in 1999. And I didn't get to meet Mr. Udall, but I did get to meet his two sons and his daughter at the Udall Institute in Arizona. Our lives and our livelihood are intimately tied to the food we eat, water we drink, and the places we recreate. That's why we have to promote responsibility and conservation when it comes to our natural resources. And it just seemed to fit. And as I saw the quote, I thought it's perfect for today because this is what we do. This is what we do. And again, when I was awarded that scholarship in 1999, little did I know that I would be using the words of Congressman Udall's son today. Again, our mission. During my interview process, I don't know how many times I mentioned our mission, our vision, strategic goals, mission, vision, strategic goal. Every organization needs to be focused around its mission, vision, and strategic goals. Otherwise, you're just sort of flopping around, going from one thing to the next. This drives us. This keeps us focused. This keeps us focused forward. I look at this every single day, and I try to remind myself to continue to pursue each of those things. And our goals. And I love the action verbs, right? To connect. Connecting people to the public, and connecting them not only to science, but our natural world, our natural resources. You know, Aldo Leopold in the Sand County Almanac, one of my favorite lines in there, many of them, but this is a section where Mr. Leopold says, in order to understand where your food comes from and understand the land, you should grow a garden. In order to understand where heat comes from, you should cut a cord of wood and build a fire. It's about connecting us with that, right? Connecting us with that heritage so that we can work to maintain it. To support. We want to support every conservation effort we can within our mission, vision, and strategic goals. To advocate. Because if we don't, if all we do is just sort of do the research and not extend it out, it's like the proverbial placing a basket over our candle. We don't want to place our basket over our candle. We want our candle to shine, and our candle is all of the work of the amazing people who dedicate their time to green fire. And to engage, again, in conversations and the next generation, because if we're not spending our time, and I work on this in my private life, I've worked in it for my professional life, it is building capacity in the next generation of leaders. We must build capacity in the next generation of leaders. Otherwise, you know what happens? Our leadership dies with us. So we absolutely must engage those next generation of leaders who are going to do a better job than we ever did and build a better future than we could ever possibly believe happen. So how do we do it? And this is what I've learned. And I've been on the Science Council, and I'm there on the left-hand side, second row, second person end. I'm the short one, always the short one. We start with these things. These are the groups that help us achieve our goals. And the Science Council is, again, I remember walking into my first meeting of the Science Council, and I went, I should not be here. Number one, I'm not a scientist. My degree is environmental policy and planning. I have lots of science, but I'm a policy nerd. I'm a public administrator. I spent 20 years running county departments. And I walk into this room and that picture in front of you, those were the people filling the room, the massive brain trust of Green Fire, the amazing subject matter experts filled that room, and I felt very inadequate. These are the people that drive the Green Fire think tank. And we do that, again, many of the people on the Science Council populate our work groups. And you see all those work groups there, and guess what? I want to add to them. So I already had a conversation with Paul this morning that maybe we need to start thinking about possibly a work group on public funding and public administration, trying to really connect how government works with actually translating the research into action. But amazing work groups, as you can see, they really translate the expertise and ideas of our members and supporters, and they translate them into action in everything that they do. In 2023, and this is just a snapshot, I just wanted you to see what you've accomplished. Not just the work groups, not just the Science Council, but every member of Green Fire. This is what you accomplished. In May, we had a PFAS conference in Wausau. You can see that room is full. All of those people there are members of local government, wanting desperately to learn about PFAS. They wanted just some basic information so that when they get the call, and maybe it's a town board member, a village board member, city council person, they want to be able to have the basic knowledge of what a PFAS is, what they can do about it, and what the network of support looks like. Again, you did this. You, Wisconsin Green Fire members. Mentoring the next generation of leaders. January, you saw last January, we had the Aspiring Conservation Professionals retreat. And you can see there's a couple of different generations sitting on that sofa and chair. That's how we build capacity in that next generation of leaders. Presenting at conferences, and you probably recognize the guy at the podium, that's Tom Hauge, at the Wildlife Society meeting in February. But you see up there, blazoned across the front of the screen is Wisconsin Green Fire's logo. And we have testified at a number of hearings throughout the year 2023, everything from, of course, wolves to the public trust doctrine and to many other things. These are the things that you do. And we just don't go into these things blind. First, we do the research. First, we develop the policy position. We build consensus around that. And then our emissaries, all of these people go out and share our message. So our work group priorities, and I typically don't like a lot of text on PowerPoints and I don't read it. I try not to, because guess what? I'm assuming all of you can read. So we will not read it. But again, if you can see, there's a theme that's running through many of these. The aspiring conservation professionals, again, they want mentors. They want to be those next leaders. They can't do that without our members stepping up and saying, you know what, I'm ready to connect. I'm ready to take that leap and be a part of building the next generation. The climate and energy work group, again, about advocating and educating and reaching out. Contaminants of emerging concern. That's mostly PFAS work. And I take a sigh because we spent a lot of time on SB 312. I was on the contaminants of emerging concern from its inception. And that would have been the bill that would have distributed the $125 million to communities in need and impacted by PFAS. It didn't quite work out the way we wanted, but that doesn't mean we give up. We will continue to work on this topic. Our environmental education work group, I love that they are looking at reaching out to science teachers. In my former job as the director at Marathon County, I was asked to present to the science teachers last year on why we should build solid waste recycling and composting into a high school science curriculum. This is where the rubber meets the road. We shouldn't wait until students are in college to start educating them about the things that are important to us. To me, when I was working, was of course solid waste and recycling, composting. Now it's about conservation. Let's connect sooner. Let's not wait until they're in college. The environmental rules and water resources and the fisheries group, I can see great tie-in there, and I think you'll all recognize that as you start looking at nutrient runoff and the risk that it poses to, particularly poses to sensitive streams for trout habitat and other more fragile species. And in that, what I see, and that falls in line with our natural resources conservation grant, is great tie-in on how we can have our work groups working together to build capacity across all of our work groups to achieve greater outcomes. Our public lands and forestry work group, you can see the work that they're going to be doing. One of the biggest things, and if you look at bullet point B, I was in Madison last week talking to a number of our conservation partners and other nonprofit groups, and this is a theme I heard from them. We need to start now to work together on the stewardship program reauthorization, because if we don't have a consistent message throughout all of our organizations, we may not have successful reauthorization. So that has to be a priority for 2024. Public trust and wetlands group. Last week, I met with the executive director for the Wetlands Association and had a great discussion about the topics you see there and how they can partner with us on helping us achieve our goals, because ultimately it will help them achieve their goals. And the wildlife work group, you can see, is working on CWD management. The one thing is a long-term funding for the conservation fund. And when I was working in solid waste, we repeatedly tried to find ways to have a more sustainable system of funding the environmental management account, which landfills contribute almost 80% of the money that goes into those. So those are some of the things that I will be working with the work groups on, and my learning curve will go like that. So I will have a master's degree every time I meet with them, because I will learn so much from them. And I will say that Paul Heinen, our ledge director, he is the one that keeps me on track and really connected with these. And so I want to shout out to Paul as not only our work groups, but he's done such a great job of connecting me with our partners like Conservation Voters, the Wetland Association, all of those groups, so that we can hit the ground running in 2024 as a team. I'm really super excited about this, and really, 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 really super excited. Is in 2024, we are going to do a cross-disciplinary approach to research and policy development. Right now, we all are aware, and Joe Ansel, you're probably very familiar with the project in the town of Grant. Many of you others are also, if you're from central Wisconsin like I am. The large solar farms, of course, bypass local control. They are automatically permitted under certain conditions that exclude local control. This is a challenge, of course. I've been an elected official, and as an elected official, I don't like being, I have no control over the policy of my jurisdiction. What we want to do is try to find a solution. It's not going to change that local control, but if we can find a way to advance, we all know that we need more sustainable systems of energy. We cannot continue to pollute our air with carbon-based sources of energy. So the Climate and Energy Work Group wants to continue to pursue its goals and mission. And the Wildlife Work Group is saying, we want to make sure if we're going to have solar farms placed, we want to make sure they're in appropriate locations, or if they're near sensitive habitats, how we can best lay out plans to protect sensitive species. I think we might even bring in fisheries here because this could include those kind of things related to runoff or amphibians having access, turtles having access. So I think there's a great opportunity for collective policy development here and research. Excited as well because we're looking at bringing in local government, extension, and other partners. So I will be sending out a doodle to schedule a first meeting of the chairs, co-chairs of each of the energy and climate work group and the wildlife group work group to start framing this out, because this is a topic that needs to be addressed and we need to look at it objectively and through science and through a lens that is most protective of the habitats while promoting renewable energy. So super excited about that. And from a legislative, legal, and regulatory perspective, we're going to continue. Paul's going to continue to work on much of that. Wake boats, and I don't know if David joined us yet, but we can talk about that in a bit. PFAS, as I mentioned, we've got $125 million sitting there, and we cannot get it in the hands of the people who need it. The Wolf Plan already has 2 lawsuits against it. We will continue to watch that. Commercial trout fishing, there is a scope statement out on a request. Ooh, I heard a voice. So we will be monitoring that, filling lake beds and the public trust doctrine, new leadership at the DNR. We'll see what that looks like. And as I said before, the stewardship reauthorization. And we all know that the budget process is always a surprise to see what we're going to be dealing with. So we will be dealing with whatever pops up along the way. And look for us at these conferences. We want to get out and really show our brand. We're proud of our brand, share our brand, try to, recruit new volunteers, new members, new donors, new supporters. We want to be part of these organizations in helping them achieve their goals, because they will help us achieve our goals. And again, there's our website. Please visit our website. That's the general email. I gave you mine before. And if you wish to support our work, please visit us at wigreenfire.org. And I am happy to take any questions that you may have. Nobody has questions.
So as Tom mentioned toward the beginning of the meeting, it will really help us if you can put your questions in the chat, and I can help moderate those. And we've had 2 so far.
Okay.
So Melissa, Mike Goodman asked, how do turtles fit in with when you were talking about solar farms?
Oh, sure. How they fit in is this. Solar farms, they'll put fences around them because, of course, they want to try to limit access by humans and deer and everything else. Mostly humans, because they can be the most destructive, right? Where turtles come in is if the solar farm is adjacent to turtle habitat, so a stream, but they need to be able to get to a place to lay eggs, and that fence is going all the way to the ground. That turtle will not be able to get to its nesting ground. That's where turtles come in. And I just learned, I learned that from my friends in the wildlife group. So I do not know the answer about the wolf, what that will do to the population numbers. I do not have that information, and therefore I don't know if Tom's on the call.
Actually, Adrian's on. Carolyn, do you want to ask the question?
Yeah.
Sure. Adrian, would you like me to read those questions aloud for the benefit of the meeting, or why don't I do that? I'll read both of the questions we've had on wolves, and then Adrian, if you could speak to those. So Cindy Carter wrote, I would like to know why WGF is supporting the wolf slaughtering plan that came out recently, seeing as it had no public meeting or input from the tribes. And I'll just read both comments and then we'll get to Adrian to address them. And Mario Seaman asked, what will the impact on wolf populations be as a result of the wolf hunt? Is it dangerously close to a Montana 2.0? And Adrian, thank you for being here. And if you could unmute.
That's what I'm trying to get to. Sorry, it's been.
We can hear you great now.
I finally found my unmute. Could you repeat that first question? I was struggling there trying to get in.
Yes. So the first.
Oh, why we
from
support
Cindy
this
Carter.
plan? Oh, why we support this plan? The plan
Correct.
does not cause a slaughter of wolves. It's a very reasonable plan. It follows along with similar plans for other states. And as to comparisons with Montana, Montana is trying to drastically reduce its wolf population. This plan does not have any goals to drastically reduce the wolf population, but to maintain basically the population on the landscape that currently exists. So we're very positive about this plan. We made a lot of recommendations to DNR on the plan. Most of our recommendations were accepted and made part of the final plan. So we're very pleased with the plan.
Adrian,
Thank
excuse me,
Oh.
but Adrian, could you address that state law separate from the plan requires a wolf hunt? And I think that's what they're responding to.
That's
Yeah.
true. Yeah, there is a state law that requires the DNR to hold a wolf hunting season anytime they're not on the federal or state endangered or threatened species list. And DNR cannot really do anything about that, but the DNR has crafted a plan that deals with those requirements to hold a wolf hunting and trapping season, while at the same time acknowledging the benefits of the wolf population and really focusing on ecological benefits. As far as I know that the DNR did have extensive meetings with the tribes in preparations for the plan, including development of special buffer areas around reservations to reduce any kind of harvest on reservation wolves. So I think there was pretty extensive work with the tribes that the DNR did in preparation for this plan.
Thanks, Adrian and Don.
Any other questions for Melissa about work group activities or other things in her early days as our new executive director?
Or if you want to know what goes in the recycling bin and what doesn't go in the recycling bin, I can answer those questions too.
So Mario asked, has WGF worked in prairie and oak savanna restoration?
That I do not know. I would look to somebody else with historical context.
Well, I can answer a little bit of that on our Public Lands and Forestry Work Group. We look at
Okay.
all the regional master plans
Okay.
that DNR does. And so we encourage oak and prairie restoration in all those plans. There's usually a variety of alternatives, and we work, review the plans, there's regional master plans for the 16 different regions in Wisconsin. In any place where prairies or oak savanna or oak barrens were present, we encourage the department to include those in the plans, and so far they have. So looking good.
And Kelly Kearns is asking how they might join a work group. Send me an email. We'd be happy to welcome you with open arms. Any other questions? Oh, how do I see my management style and expertise moving us forward? Well, let's start from the beginning. I am, again, not a scientist. I'm a public administrator. My background is in regulatory policy and analysis, which then translated to 20 years of being a public administrator. I ran solid waste departments, which meant that I had staff in far reaches of 600, 700 acres out doing their job. That laid the groundwork for me growing into my management style, which is not micromanagement. That's where your mission, vision, and strategic goals come in, right? Because that's setting the direction. And so when I look to managing folks, I look to keeping people on that track, not telling them what to do necessarily, but how their expertise, how their skill set, how their strengths can support that. And together we work on building the organization. So that's from a staff perspective. I think from an overall organizational perspective, it's very similar. Looking at all of the Brady Bunch boxes here, each one of you brings an amazing skill set and strengths, individual strengths. We have to learn how to use that skill set and those individual strengths to our best advantage. To do something different, so in other words, putting someone in a position where they're not best suited, really sets up not only the organization for failure, but it also sets up that person for failure. So that's how I begin my management style and it's frankly, it's hard because it takes time to get to know people, to create an empathy and an understanding of where they are in their professional and private lives and how we can best utilize those. One of my main strengths is it's called restorative and strategic. So I'm very strategic, but I also like to fix things. And what I recognize is that Wisconsin Green Fire is an organization that went through its infancy. It's now sort of in its teen years. It's growing, and it's at the point where without clear direction and focus, we won't make it to our adult years. So, and that's exactly what I did for Marathon County Solid Waste. They were on the cusp of probably not being around. What I did was, and my job was, at that time, my boss told me, your job is to make that department a resource for not only the community, but for all of North Central Wisconsin. And that's what I did. So I recognized where we had shortcomings, tried to fill in those gaps, build strengths, build opportunity, stay focused on our mission and vision, and build that future. But we all need to buy into where we're going. So setting that path forward is going to be really important. That's my job. And that's where all of that getting to know everybody comes in, so that I can understand how I can best utilize the strength of not only individuals, but the collective to build that future. Thanks, Terry. Good question.
So I think that is it for questions in the chat, though I'll be happy to answer that the meeting is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel. So I'll be sending out a follow-up message with that recording for anyone who wants to watch it or those who weren't able to attend. And just the comment about upcoming events. Stay tuned. We'll be putting more on our website about events in 2024. But the retreat that is for students and professionals in early January, that registration period has closed, just so everyone knows. But I think it's going to be a really excellent retreat coming up in Land O'Lakes.
I would just also mention that I'd be happy, we could talk if anyone has something they would like to invite me to, or to present about Green Fire, to present about PFAS, to present about whatever we're doing. Please let me know. I'm happy to travel. I want to be able to get to the many corners of this great state. And if you have something, reach out. If we can get something organized, happy to meet with you.
All right, on to a discussion about wake boats. And Melissa, and is going to stand in here for a little bit, along with some input from our science director, Mike Meyer. So go ahead and talk about wake boats for a bit.
Sure. And here's another thing that I had never heard of before, although I've seen them on the lakes and now it makes sense. Wake boats are these very large, deep-hulled boats that you add a lot of ballast to, so they sit low in the water. And when they go from zero to very fast, they create this very big wake behind them. And while this may look fun for some people, again, this is a very fundamental perspective. Mike is going to fill in all of the background on what I can't. This is what I've learned. The reason they are so destructive, as you can well imagine, which is apparent once you see them. And I saw them on a little lake in Manitowoc County called Cedar Lake, not a huge lake, but as it hit the shoreline, it actually started hitting against the rock. And then where there wasn't rock, you could see it was actually chewing away at the edge of the lake. So these boats do a huge amount of erosion, not only on the lake's edge, but because they sit so deep, and if the lake isn't deep enough, it's actually disturbing the entire thermal climb of that lake. Of course, the wake boat industry is going, we want to sell lots of wake boats because they're very expensive, and that's our job, is to make stuff and sell it. What happened is these are being used inappropriately on lakes where they're not well suited. Unfortunately, given the push, there is now a bill before the legislature on this. It may sit, but because of their destructive nature and because of concerns about, species and the lake beds and the lake edges, we hired as a fellow David Ortiz, who was supposed to be with us, but probably ran into something, to do a literature review. Again, what's the science behind this? To do a literature review from across the country on what is the basics that we need to be able to develop a policy position and advocacy system for the wake boats, so that we can ensure, what are we trying to do? Conserve and protect our natural resources. And that is what the Wake Boat Project is about. David he's done a fine job in his research. I've read his paper, but that's where we are. And now I'm going to hand it off to Mike, because he can provide the really detailed scientific background on this.
Okay, well, I'll give you as much background as I can. We just received a report from David, and Carolyn is in the process of editing and perhaps restructuring the report to make it more accessible for the public. But the bottom line is, as Melissa mentioned, is because this has become a contentious issue in northern Wisconsin in particular, we wanted to gather up all the scientific information that is available on the impacts of this wave action created by wake boats on littoral zones, fish and wildlife habitat, and even as far as human safety. Do these waves create a risk for people in kayaks and canoes? There's a lot of, it's developing into a public issue with some public hearings that have gotten pretty rancorous. And not only do you have the manufacturers and the property owners kind of at odds over this, but you have people that own wake boats that also do not want their recreation necessarily restricted or restricted too broadly. So what David's done is pull together some studies, particularly some done in Minnesota, where they have actually put out wake boats on lakes and measured the impacts of fully loaded wake boats where the ballasts are full, operating at different speeds in different environments of lake size and in different distances from the shoreline. And all these studies together allowed David and others to develop policy recommendations so that if wake boats are to operate appropriately on Wisconsin lakes, they do the least damage. In other words, what is the appropriate distance from shoreline that these lakes need to operate? What are the lake sizes that they could operate without creating the damage that has been measured? It's even gone as far as, looking at the depth of water where the wash of the waves do not disrupt the lake bottom, and how many contiguous acres of this size are necessary to allow a wake boat to operate without exceeding some of these parameters of distance, depth, and lake size. So David's brought together, I think, a comprehensive package of these results. He's also then formulated policy recommendations for Wisconsin to consider, citizens and decision makers, based on the scientific review. What types of lakes do we believe these boats can operate with minimal impact? What size, how far from shore, etc. One other big concern about these boats is they can empty their ballasts at will. And because of all of the concern about invasive species spread, this is obviously another big risk these operations of these boats pose to lakes in northern Wisconsin. So we're in the process of editing David's report. Carolyn's taking a lead on that. We have a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to describe how we're going to roll out these findings to the public and the decision makers and to our members so that you can see what David has put together. By the way, he put together a very credible project, and I really, after I read that, I'm like, oh, if we can get more fellows working on projects for Greenfire, this is a lot of bang for the buck. And so I think we're going to optimize fellows in our future work so that we can get products like David is creating for other topics. And actually, Paul and I and some of his colleagues were putting together a list of potential other fellowship topics that we could enroll graduate students or perhaps senior projects with other academic institutions to tackle for us. So that is background. I think once we have decided on how to roll this information out, we're going to have a seminar, a live seminar where members and the public can participate. And perhaps, Tom, you could describe that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be very timely. This is on the legislative agenda. And again, just a case where Wisconsin Greenfire is working on the issues that are of greatest conservation challenges. You've got tension between the wake boat owners who want to recreate and the people that want to care for their lakes. And we got to find a way to find the best policy solutions to address those concerns. So it's what Greenfire does best, I think. So look forward to seeing David Ortiz' paper. We'll distribute it widely, and then some type of webinar in January when it'll be helpful to inform the process. I guess between Melissa and Mike and I, we'll try to answer a few questions about this if you want. If there's any out there, Carol.
We do have a couple questions. So Mike Goodman asked, do pontoon or airboats fit in the category of wake boats?
No, they do not. We're talking about these very large, highly powered boats with ballasts that can be filled with water to generate these waves that you can actually surf behind.
Yep, it's actually wave surfing without a rope. That's how much water they displace. And I was surprised. I went to a couple of the hearings up here in the north where 200 and 300 people showed up. And I was surprised at the number of lakes that had lake boat visits and the size of those lakes, very small lakes, and totally inappropriate and damaging to the resource. So it's a big issue, and it's one of those conservation challenges where we're going to be at the table.
Hey, Mike,
David,
I hate to
go
give
ahead,
you,
Paul.
I just hate to give you any bad news, but I got bad news from the head of the Lakes Association. There's aftermarket kits to put on pontoon boats. so that they make the wakes also. He was saying, of course, think about who likes these wake boats, probably 16, 17-year-old young people. And probably pontoon boats is not the kind of thing they're looking for, but there are kits now that you can put on pontoon boats. So, oh joy.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
and I should mention too that David is presenting at the Wisconsin Lakes and Rivers Conference in Stevens Point in April. Right, April, yeah. As will Mike Meyer, he's going to be presenting on his lake toolkit, and I will be presenting. We've got a home run there. I'll be presenting on PFAS, but if you're going to the Lakes Conference in Stevens Point, you'll be able to catch David's presentation of his findings.
So
All right.
David Horst asked, I think a bit rhetorically, what in the world would be an appropriate use of wake boats? And then we had an excellent comment from Eric Rempola. Do not forget the invasive species concerns of wake boats, as their ballast tanks are difficult, if
Yeah.
not impossible, to completely drain.
Well,
I
you
think
can
there's-
envision a wake boat operating safely offshore on Lake Superior, for instance, or, even smaller than that. You could envision Lake Mendota, perhaps Lake, there are lake sizes where these boats could likely operate without generating this wave dimension that would be damaging the shoreline. So that's what we're hoping to find. What configurations of size, depth, and distance from shore can a boat operate? And this is what the Minnesota studies focused on. What are those dimensions where they can operate without tearing up the littoral zone and the bank, basically?
So perhaps our last question on wake boats for now comes from Mario Seaman. What strategies do you recommend for reaching common ground between wake boat recreators and conservationists? Both groups care about nature and the outdoors in their own ways, just different types of appreciation.
I will answer from my fundamental public policy perspective, and then Mike, please feel free. I think if David had been here and if you'd seen what he was finding in his research, the recommendations for the distance from shore, the depth of the lake, and the amount of acreage of the lake. It's not saying we're not going to allow wake boats or discontinue the use of wake boats in Wisconsin, quite the contrary. Where are they best suited? Because I think it's also a safety issue on small lakes with a lot of other boats. Someone's going to get killed. And that's the last thing anybody wants. So I think it's trying to find that sweet spot of distance from shore, depth of the lake, and then acreage over how many acres that depth exists. And then enforcement of anything that comes up. So did I miss anything, Mike? Oh, you're muted, hon. Yeah.
One way to kind of frame this is right now our regulations permit a rowboat with a 10-horse motor and a wake boat on the same lakes. Now that just doesn't make common sense when you're talking about small acreage lakes. So the public discourse, I think common sense might rise above some of the rancor when it's pitched in a way of science and common
Safety.
sense. And hopefully,
safety.
yeah, but you have the industry, that's not going to want to have their, it's going to be a difficult conversation, put it that way, but
Yeah.
it has to be had. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that was a nice discussion. Before I go on into our business meeting, just really quickly, I want to recognize that we have a couple of our ambassadors on the call today. Stan Temple and Kathleen Falk were recently added to our ambassador program, along with Russ Feingold, Patty Lowe, Tricia McConnell, and Tia Nelson. These folks help us to champion our cause, and we're very appreciative. I won't put you on the spot and ask you to speak, but I'm glad to see your faces here. Like I said, I hope to keep this business meeting short and to the point. It'll be relatively quick. First up is we have the adoption of our minutes. And I'll get them up here on screen here, if you'll just bear with me. Assuming I can manage my Zoom. So it's hard to believe that I've been in the president's chair for a little over a year, but that was one of the things we did at our last meeting, was we elected this guy to be president of Wisconsin Green Fire. It's been great fun. But did anybody see any changes? And again, these were sent to you earlier. And if not, I will accept a motion to adopt the minutes.
So, Tom, this is Susan Hedman. I'd be willing to make a motion to approve the minutes with perhaps one correction. If we have a second, we can discuss it.
Okay, we need a second to discuss.
I'll second it. Ron Eckstein.
Thank you, Ron.
Let Ron do it.
Okay, Susan, your suggestion?
My suggestion is that the date of the meeting be added to the minutes. I don't believe it actually includes the date, actual date anywhere in the minutes.
But something important. So I'll call the question on this, that we approve the minutes with the exception that we add the date of the meeting, which we will look up. I'm sure we have it in our calendar somewhere. So I guess we'll allow people to unmute or use the chat, either which one, to vote to approve the minutes as the motion suggested. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Keep going. All right. Anybody opposed? All right, motion passes. On to the articles of incorporation. And here I may be calling on Susan Hedman, who served on the bylaws committee with me. We made some fundamental changes in the way the organization is organized over the years, and they've been gradual. And we need to get the membership to approve these organizational changes. And what we're doing is fundamentally aligning ourselves with the way many of the other environmental organizations are conducted in the state of Wisconsin. It's more managed by the board as opposed to being a membership organization. That doesn't mean we won't have members and that it won't have significant input in our work. It just means that the board's going to be directing the operation more hands-on. Susan, anything you want to add?
Not really anything further. This is just kind of a standard way of organizing a nonprofit that has the board dealing with the kind of mundane day-to-day operations, but still involving members in annual meetings and other activities.
All right, so these articles of incorporation and the bylaws to follow have been approved by the board. Technically, following Robert's rules, something coming from a committee doesn't need a second or a motion even. So I'm going to call, well, it's on the table. If anybody has any questions about the articles of incorporation specifically, feel free to ask them now. All right, then I'll call the question, and all in favor of adopting the articles of incorporation
Oh,
as presented.
Tom, I think Jan Smith unmuted, but I'm not certain they were raising a question.
I did. I'm sorry. No question.
All right. Thank you for catching that, Carolyn. We want to allow the opportunity for discussion. All right. If you're able to use the chat, please do. Otherwise, unmute and signify your approval by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed, same sign? All right, we will move on to the bylaws. Again, these have been approved by both the committee and the board. Technically don't need a motion. They're on the table for discussion. I don't know, Susan, if there's anything we want to particularly highlight. I'm just going to scroll through.
Tom, RT asked in the chat, registered agent named in bylaws? Oh, but then he clarified, never mind, those were in the articles.
Yes, they were in the articles of incorporation. And you know, we're going to be making a slight change there and having a new address for the organization officially through a registered agent, which is again typically what most nonprofits do. Right now, if you look at the address, it's Terry's Cabin in Lac du Flambeau, and or not Lac du Flambeau, on the flowage there in Iron County, and I think we need to have a better address for our registered agent. I hope someday, I know I've heard from a couple of members, we can get back to having in-person annual meeting. Those were always great. It is a lot of work though. And, you know, this allows, this type of format does allow greater participation if you don't have to travel to a central location. All right, not hearing any further questions about the bylaws.
Harry, did you have a comment?
No, I retract it.
All right.
I was just thinking about the mail going through the ice, you know, with the bad ice conditions and the unusual weather. But you know, we don't want to put too much levity into the.
Perfect, Terry. You know, it's been a fun ride with Greenfire, and a lot of the board have been on it for quite a while, and it's nice to see the organization maturing and you know, getting its act together. And I think this is one of those steps to get us better organized. So I will call the question on the restated bylaws. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. So next we have our treasurer's report. And I might be out of order here. I think I'm not sure I'm following things exactly the way it was supposed to be. I think the treasurer's report was supposed to be first. So I apologize to our treasurer, Mr. Bob Kurta, because I took things out of order. Are you there, Bob?
I'm here. I'm gonna share my screen somewhere or other.
They're doing a great job. They got, well, they're concerned about
There we go. You see that?
Yep.
Okay. So it's an annual meeting. It's actually been 14 months since we had our last meeting. I don't know what the date was, but Susan, I did put the date on my screen here, so we'll know about that. This is going to be
Thank you.
in a typical treasurer's report. I report to the board of directors every 2 months, so the membership doesn't really have the usual role here, but I do want to, come on. There we go. So there's a number of activities, some of which Melissa talked about that have a financial aspect to them. So I report to the board of directors every 2 months. We, again, like the year before, had a review of our books, which some people call a light audit. It's not a full audit. We may be going to a full audit in the next year or two. We switched over from doing our own bookkeeping to having a service, an accounting service, which is headquartered here in Madison, but the person we deal with actually lives in Green Bay. It's a company that specializes in working with nonprofits, which is very helpful. We had an auction this last spring of donated items and experiences, which helped raise some money. This fall, we started a multi-year project with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is really interesting, that will help us financially too. And we're just in the last few days here of this year's fundraising campaign. So the numbers aren't all in completely, but it's operating pretty similar to the way it did last year. So what I want to do, instead of talking about things today or this whole year, is to look back from the beginning. And I've been the treasurer for 4 years, so I don't span this whole period. But if we look at by quarter, how much income we've had, that's the left-hand graph. You'll see that it's sort of punctuated. Every year we have a big surge of funding. That's the last quarter of the year, the quarter we're in right now. And that's the income other months has been pretty modest. Interestingly here, the very first year was the highest or almost the highest. And you might say, well, how did that ever happen? Because you didn't even have fundraising. So the story, as I've been told, is Greenfire got organized and a number of people said, oh, I'll put some money into the pot to get things going. And one person who's anonymous, is not a member of the board or any of the work groups, as I understand it, stepped forward and said, I'll give you $100,000. And he did. And he's given us money since. So without that, it would have been really hard to get the airplane off the runway. But that was a critical point in history here. So the income's sporadic. The expenses by quarter, as you see in the second graph, have started out pretty low and they've risen slowly and kind of stabilized in the last few years as staff were hired. That's where most of the money goes, is people. There's a little bit that goes to software subscriptions and insurance and accounting and travel, but the great bulk of it is for salaries of a small staff. Now, if you take the left-hand graph and the right-hand graph and you, in your brain, integrate those two, you could figure out which quarters we actually had a net profit or which quarters we were spending more than came in. But I'll do that for you. So here you can see we've got, again, some every year in the last quarter, we're bringing in a lot more money than we're spending. Otherwise, we're spending money during the year. But the real question here is, when this is all said and done, how much money do you have in the bank? Do you have enough to get to the next month, to get to the next year? And so if you look at something that's called a balance sheet, that's an accounting term, but essentially the simple way of looking at it is how much money do you have in the bank at the end of a period of time? Could be a day, a week, a month, a quarter, a year. This is by quarter again. It's the same scale as the other graphs. And you'll see, unsurprisingly, it starts out towards the end of 1 year and then it declines. And it goes up and it declines and it goes up and it declines. But the question really here is how dangerous is it to get low, and how much do you want to have in reserve to feel comfortable? So here's this last graph, a little larger, and I've increased the y-axis so it goes up to $350,000. Why 350,000? Because that's what our budget's been the last few years. Our base budget, not counting grant income, project income. So how much is enough? At any point in the year, how much should you have in the bank just as reserve? And some people who run nonprofits would say, well, we feel good if we have anything left at the end of the year. Well, that's pretty dangerous. What about 25%? We've almost always been above that at any point in any year. Well, that's still pretty shaky. How about 50%? Well, we've been above that probably fewer months than we've been below it. So the place we really want to be is up here. Well, that looks like a real stretch. Why do we want to be up there so we have a full year's worth of expenditures in the bank at the lowest point of the year? Why do we want to be there? Well, if we want to go after large grants from big national foundations, they're going to want to see that we have staying power. And they may ask for some match. They'll give us $500,000 if we put up 100,000 or some percentage. So that's why we need numbers up that high to go forward into the future. And I'm not going to talk about how you might get there. I think Melissa has a few ideas about that. And how long would it take us to get there? That's another question. But this is kind of a historical perspective of where we started and where we've gotten to, and in my mind, where we need to aspire to reach eventually. Any questions about that?
Thanks, Bob. I think we should entertain some questions. I'm always amazed at the generosity of our donors, both the small donors and the large donors. It speaks to our mission and vision that Melissa talked about. I also want to say that a lot of our money does go to staffing, but we have one of the leanest, and I won't say meanest, one of the leanest and nicest staff there is in all of the nonprofits. And everybody works hard and gets a lot done. And so our strength is really our volunteer base, the people that volunteer their time to do the policy analysis. So anything you want to add, Melissa?
No, I think, again, we should always have goals, obviously. 50% of our operating budget is a good spot to be. I think a lot of municipal budgets are set that way. I think the one thing we have to do, from my perspective, is that we have to diversify our income base. Right now, again, I'm going to do the NPR, WPR sort of thing. Thank you to the members. You are primary funder, and we appreciate you. We really do, because you are our primary funders, our members, our donors, our supporters. But we are running a business. Even though it's a nonprofit, we're running a business. And in any business, you have to have a diversity of income in order to make sure that you have sustainability over time. So I think we have to look at, and I mentioned this at the board meeting in December, not only grants from like the federal government, but also grants from foundations, and probably trying to figure out, where best to place our money. We need to grow the organization. We need to diversify our income base and not rely on just one source of income. That is a fragile thing, and we don't want to go there.
All right. So we're at the end of our business meeting, and I will adjourn it. We don't need a motion for that since we're at the end of our agenda with no further agenda items on our business meeting. So the business meeting is adjourned. And now for some fun. Bob, you can stop sharing your screen. That's boring stuff.
No,
We
it's
did
not.
have
It's
a
actually
couple-
really, really interesting.
I'm just kidding.
We
But
did
I'm a
have a
weirdo.
couple comments or questions in
go
the
ahead.
chat. Okay, so Melissa already addressed Joanne Klein's point about an endowment fund. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that, Melissa?
No, well, one of the things I thought would be, there's a number of ways to endow. And I think as we look at our fellowships and our scholarships, we should definitely build an endowment. And I know Flossie, when she was still with Greenfire, had mentioned it. So that's kind of one subset. And then I think building an endowment around either projects, usually you don't build endowments around operations, but you build them around projects or something you were looking forward towards the future. It is work because you have to find the funders willing to support that over the long haul, and then to establish what level that's going to be. But I think an endowment is a great idea, and it's something I've been thinking about for a while.
So I had a direct message question. Would landowners or other stakeholders purchasing a conservation easement from Wisconsin's Greenfire be a possibility?
Oh, anything's a possibility.
There certainly are a number of land trusts who specialized in conservation easements.
Mhm.
It's not been in our thinking, but it's certainly something to consider.
Absolutely.
And then Todd Highsmith asked, one way of looking at financial stability is to note how many months of operating expenses are in the bank. How do we stand on that metric?
Bob, did you do that data?
No, I didn't, but since our primary cost is staff, and that's pretty much the same month to month.
Mhm.
Right
Yeah.
And
now,
Paula
because
Liberty.
right now,
Yeah,
because it's coming up to the end of the big funding push for the year. Right now, that's in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
At the low point of the last few years,
Mhm.
I don't know what that number is.
I think to your question, Todd, that is one way to look at it. One way that Bob presented it was how much reserve do we have? And that's the way, when I was chair of the finance committee for the city of Stevens Point, that's the way we looked at the health of the city. What is our reserve? Where do you want it to be? And it was usually a percentage of our operating budget. However, when I was president of Associated Recyclers of Wisconsin, we established that we wanted to have enough money in the bank. Our financial policy, fiscal policy was that we would have at least 4 months operating capital. And if we fell below that, then we would have to either cut staff or do any of those things. I believe our staffing, if you look at a 3 or 4 months, where we're sitting with our general amount of money, we're safe there. But again, I don't like being just safe. I think we've got 3 or 4 months easily, even at our low point, to cover staff. But I don't like cutting that close to the bone. I hope that answers your question, Todd.
How are we doing, Carolyn?
I believe the last question is from Paula Liberty. Is there any way to be compensated for some of our products and still remain a nonprofit?
I had that same question, Paul, because one of the things that came up as we started looking at some of the money coming in from the Inflation Reduction Act and the Biden infrastructure law, there's a lot of money out there coming in for, particularly for climate projects, whether that's nature-based solutions or some other sort of project, funneling it through the governor's office. And as I sat in one of the calls with the governor's office, it looks like the money has to be channeled to local units of government. Makes some sense. But then as Fred and I talked about it, because he was in on the workshop, we talked later, the only way that we could really find a niche there would be to take our expertise, which we have a lot of it, and try to figure out, be a contractor of sorts to help local units of government, number one, find the money, and then find the best way to use the money in that jurisdiction. So I don't know what that looks like as far as earned income versus pursuing our mission. So it's a good question we should probably look into.
We did garner some money when we held the PFAS conference.
Yeah.
And it paid for our expenses and some of our overhead by finding sponsors. So you can charge for your services. It just has to fit in your nonprofit box.
Right.
Steve Seifert here. I don't know all the ins and outs of it for nonprofit law, but I do know that organizations like the Community Blood Center actually sell blood products. So you can do that again, as Tom said, it has to be mission related. It can't be unrelated income. That's a big deal. If you're doing something, renting land or something to others, then you got a problem, I think, but not if it's mission oriented. So it can be done. I don't know what you have to do, especially to set that up through the IRS or whatever, but I'm pretty sure it can be done.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, we are going to move on, if I can, Carolyn. And I would like to introduce our past president and artist in resident, Terry Dalton.
Well, you know, it's really dangerous, Tom, when you introduce me and my husband, Jeff, is sitting here just before he was threatening to, you know, try to take over the microphone or do some shenanigan behind me. So if you see me blank out the screen in the middle of this, you'll know there's something nefarious going on. But Tom just asked me to do something really simple and easy, and that is to just talk a little bit about maybe why it is we're all doing this. You know, I look through there are 4 pages I have to cycle through here to see everybody on this call today. And I see so many people who have been with us from the beginning, but also excitingly, a lot of new faces of people I haven't met. And I just wanted to shout out there to Stan Temple, who was one of the people that was very instrumental at our first annual meeting. And it's so fun to see him there and have him coming out to be one of our ambassadors. And I see, you know, if I had people raise their virtual hands, you'd see lots of people that could be cited for various things. But, you know, the conversations in the chat about how much fun it would be to have an annual meeting, that's what we really all come together for, because there's something that drives us beyond the science and the charts and the graphs, and even beyond perhaps our dedication through careers in the natural resources. And that's our caring about the environment. And often the way people respond to that is through our relationships and the fun that we're having together, but also through some of the arts. And one of my other hat that I wear when I'm not doing Greenfire volunteer work, I work on a art science collaboration at the Trout Lake Limnology Station. And I've been really lucky the last few years to work with art interns. They've actually had 3 interns every year working with the science interns and with the professional scientists there. And then we brought in professional art mentors. And the collaboration of those things and the synergy that forms when you see people working across, talk about silos. If you think we're siloed between our work groups, then you throw in creative writers or artists into the science silos. But once they start to interact, that's what makes it really fun and meaningful. And for me, maybe it's through the visual arts. I know there are people here that are also really tied into music or creative writing. I know my dear sister couldn't live without music, or our treasurer, Bob Gerda. He's a musician. Maybe one of these years we'll get to have an annual meeting when his dance band will play for us. I've been lobbying for that for several years. But we also have a lot of great writers, and our communications specialist, Carolyn, is also a creative writer. And in our discussions about the meeting tonight, we talked about inviting some of our poets. Nancy Larson has read in the past, and others. Lucy Tyrrell has read. John Bates is here. He's a writer. But Carolyn had a suggestion to go to our poet laureate for the country, and she's going to read a poem in her best poetry reading style to kind of take us off on a inspirational note. So I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn.
Thank you, Terry. And I just, I've been really happy to moderate this conversation during the annual meeting and get to interact with some of you in the chat. And I just want to say that I feel really privileged to be a part of the Green Fire team. I've been only with the organization since May, but it has been really wonderful, and I love being a part of this community. So the poem that I would like to read this evening is The Great Blue Heron of Dunbar Road by our U.S. Poet Laureate Ada Limon. So I'm going to share my screen because as much as I love poetry as an auditory art, I also appreciate being able to read along. So if you'll bear with me a moment while I pull that up. The Great Blue Heron of Dunbar Road by Ada Limon. That we might walk out into the woods together and afterwards make toast in our sock feet, still damp from the fern's wet grasp, the spiky needles stuck to our legs. That's all I wanted. The dog in the mix. Jam sometimes, but not always. But somehow I've stopped praising you. How the valley, when you first see it, the small roads back to your youth, is so painfully pretty at first. Then, after a month of black coffee, it's just another bullish place, another place your bullish brain exists, bothered by itself and how hurtful human life can be. Isn't that how it is? You wake up some days full of crow and shine, and then someone has put engine coolant in the medicine on another continent, and not even crying helps cure the idea of purposeful poison. What kind of woman am I? What kind of man? I'm thinking of the way my stepdad got sober, how he never told us, just stopped drinking and sat for a long time in the low folding chair on the Bermuda grass, reading and sometimes soaking up the sun like he was the story's only subject. When he drove me to school, we decided it would be a good day if we saw the blue heron in the algae-covered pond next to the road, so that if we didn't see it, I'd be upset. Then he began to lie, to tell me he'd seen it when he hadn't, or to suppose that it had just taken off when we rounded the corner in the gray car that somehow still ran. And I would lie too. For him, I'd say, I saw it, heard the whoosh of wings over us. That's the real truth, what we told each other to help us through the day. The great blue heron was there, even when the pond dried up or froze over. It was there because it had to be. Just now, I felt like I wanted to be alone for a long time. in a folding chair on the lawn with all my private agonies. But then I saw you, and the way you're hunching over your work like a puzzle. And I think, even if I fail at everything, I still want to point out the heron like I was taught. Still want to slow the car down, to see the thing that makes it all better. The invisible gift, what we see when we stare long enough into nothing. Thank you, everyone.
It was
I will turn
beautiful.
it back to Tom.
Thank you. And I will turn it over to Melissa for our toast tonight.
Well, and actually, I have red wine here. It's been sitting by my computer this entire time and I have not touched it. So here to all of you, from my heart, sincerely, thank you for starting this organization, for building this organization, for caring. Wisconsin's a great place. I grew up here. You all have made it better. Thank you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your guidance. Let's go out and get this darn thing done. Here, here.
Here, here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa. And
You're
Carol
welcome.
and Terry. Happy New Year to everybody.
Thanks, Steve.
Nostrovia.
Astrovia.
We should all
Kukli
unmute and say Happy New Year. I think.
Salut.
Oh, everybody unmute and we'll go, when I go 3, right? And we'll say Happy New Year. 1, 2, 3.
Happy New Year.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Have a lovely
everyone.
evening.
I'm really surprised that 68 people stayed through this meeting. Thank you very much. That's very warming to me to know that you stuck with us for an hour and a half. So thank you very much.
No, they've stuck with you for a lot longer.
Thank you,
Yes.
Tom.